The world snapped into focus with a jolt, like a dislocated bone being shoved back into its socket. One moment, there was nothing but the vague, pain-riddled haze of a long, hard life. The next, I was staring into the face of Leo Grant. Elara, don't go. Okay, just stay here with me, please. His face loomed larger and larger as he leaned in, his voice, once the source of so many foolish dreams, was now painfully familiar. My body moved on instinct, a surge of pure, unadulterated rage fueling muscles that had been old and tired for decades. I shoved him away hard. He stumbled back, surprise etched on his features, and I hurried backward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took in my surroundings, my breath catching in my throat. It was the same small grove on the edge of Oakwood Village, the very spot where my life had been derailed. The air smelled of damp earth and wild mint. Outside the ring of trees, I could hear the distant, familiar sounds of villagers at work, the clang of a tool against a bucket, the low murmur of conversation. And right in front of me stood Leo, but a Leo the first hadn't seen in over 40 years. He looked years younger, his face unlined by the bitterness and deceit that would later settle there. Elara Vance, I didn't expect you to be this strong, he said, a slow, easy smirk spreading across his face. He wasn't angry, just amused, as if my resistance was a charming, temporary inconvenience. Hey, easy. Don't make a scene or you'll bring people over. His condescension was the final spark. Without a single conscious thought, my leg lashed out. The kick landed squarely with a satisfying, sickening thud between his legs. His smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. A high, tearing scream ripped from his throat, shredding the peaceful afternoon air. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my feet finding the path on their own, following a muscle memory buried deep beneath a lifetime of regret. I ran past the fields, past the staring villagers, all the way back to the long, low building that housed the educated youth outpost. Seeing that familiar, worn-down place, a sound burst from my lips, a wild, half-sobbing laugh. I pinched the soft skin on my forearm hard. The sharp, bright pain was a confirmation. It was real. This wasn't some deathbed hallucination. I had been reborn, sent back to this specific year, this specific month, right before we were supposed to return to the city. Leo hadn't switched the names on the list yet. The document that would seal my fate was still, presumably, in the brigade leader's possession. There were still endless possibilities. The weight of that thought was so immense it stole my breath. Maybe it had been too long since I'd run like that, or maybe it was the sheer emotional whiplash, but exhaustion crashed over me. I sank onto a rough-hewn plank bench outside the outpost, gulping in air, trying to steady my trembling hands. The other educated youths trickled back from their work assignments one after another. Their looks were strange, a mixture of curiosity and unease. I gazed at their young, familiar faces, faces I hadn't seen in decades. There was Maya, who would become a schoolteacher, Ben, who would open a small shop, and Liam, whose family connections would secure him a coveted, iron rice bowl job. After we returned to the city that year, everyone had scattered to their own destinies. Some, like I had been in my last life, were trapped in the countryside forever. Others made it back, and we seldom, if ever, saw each other again. It was Isabella Rossi who broke the silence. Her voice, soft and laced with a feigned concern that I now recognized, cut through the murmurs. Elara, what happened between you and Leo? She studied me up and down, her large, limpid eyes clouded with what anyone else would mistake for genuine worry. I looked at her, this girl whom Leo and later his children would hold closest to his heart. She had a delicate, demure beauty, every frown and smile carefully cultivated to project a soft fragility. Among our batch of city youths sent down to the countryside, she shone the brightest, the object of admiration for countless village men. But Isabella guarded her reputation with a ferocity that should have been a warning, never getting close to any man except Leo. Their families had been neighbors long ago, before the Rossis moved to the city. Even in my previous life I'd been fooled, believing their bond was one of innocent childhood friendship. Looking at her now, standing there so innocently, the signs I had missed were glaringly obvious. If you're that concerned, just ask him yourself, I said, my voice flat and devoid of the warmth I had always shown her. I had no desire to trade barbs. I needed to act. No. I stood up, loosening my limbs, and before Isabella could formulate another word to try and explain or deflect, I sprinted straight for the brigade leader's house. Her voice calling after me faded into the background noise of the village. I couldn't hear her and I didn't want to. When I reached the gate of Brigade Leader Murdoch's house, I saw Leo already inside talking with him. A faint, confident smile was on Leo's face. He was leaning forward in the middle of saying something. "Then I'll leave it to you, Uncle Murdoch." Before he could finish, I strode in and planted myself squarely between them. Leo's smile vanished. The lingering pain from my kick made his face look pale and terrible, though he was clearly forcing his anger down. "Elara, what exactly are you doing?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "Didn't we already agree?" I ignored him, turning my full attention to the grizzled, middle-aged man behind the desk. "I'm here to tell Uncle Murdoch that there will be no wedding." In the countryside, weddings were often simple affairs. You reported it to the brigade leader, set out a banquet, and you were considered married. There were no official certificates, just the word of the community. "Elara hasn't been well lately," Leo said quickly, his voice tight. "She's been acting a little crazy. I'll take her back. Please understand." He reached out to grab my arm, to physically drag me away as if I were a misbehaving child. I jerked my arm free with all my strength, putting the weight of my body into the motion. He staggered back several steps and fell into a wooden chair, disbelief written all over his face. Brigade Leader Murdoch had never much liked me. He always thought I was the kind of girl who couldn't endure hardship, who only relied on men to get by. The bitter irony was that I did most of the farm work assigned to both Leo and me, while he used the excuse of being with me to secretly meet with Isabella, something I only learned later in my previous life from whispered gossip. I didn't care about any of that now. If I let this moment slip, it would be too late. "Uncle Murdoch, I don't want to give up my chance to return to the city." What I hadn't expected was his flat denial. "Return to the city list?" he grunted, not meeting my eyes. "I haven't received any such list from the commune." I remembered perfectly well. The commune had already issued it by this time. I knew it was in this very house. "Comrade Elara Vance," Murdoch said, his tone shifting to one of paternalistic authority, "since you've agreed to marry Leo, you mustn't go back on your word so easily. A woman's virtue is her worth. As for whether your name is on any list, you'll be notified when it arrives." He dodged the point entirely and slipped in a veiled warning besides. After that, I didn't hear a single word he said. My mind was racing, quickly piecing together all the relationships. I realized I had overlooked an important fact from both my past and present life. Isabella Rossi's family had moved from Oakwood Village to the city. They must have had far better connections here than I did. Were the Murdochs and the Rossis linked in some way? Leo walked over, trying again to pat my shoulder in a placating gesture. "Elara, let's just go. Don't disturb Uncle Murdoch anymore." I sidestepped his touch and glanced deeply at the brigade leader. I understood now. Even if I stayed here all day, pleaded or shouted, he would never bring out that list. The game was rigged, and I had just realized I was playing on a field tilted against me. After leaving Murdoch's house, Leo trailed right behind me, a shadow I couldn't shake. "Elara, what's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice a mix of irritation and confusion. "Didn't you already agree?" Irritated, I quickened my pace, my mind whirring. I had no intention of letting the tragedy from my previous life happen again. But Leo clung to me like a burr, impossible to get rid of. We came face to face with Isabella and several other educated youths at a crossroads in the village. I stopped instinctively, fixing them with a cold stare. "Leo, Elara, are you two okay?" Isabella asked, her voice the picture of innocence. It wasn't long before word spread through all of Oakwood Village that I was refusing to marry Leo Grant. Since the return to the city list hadn't been officially announced yet, everyone had the time and inclination to gossip. In the past, I'd been the one head over heels, sending him half of everything my family mailed me: dried meats, precious sugar, sturdy cloth. Everyone had seen it. By rights, Leo, who'd grown up in the countryside, should have been more resilient than me. But he was the only son in his family, spoiled rotten by his older sisters. Anything good to eat went to him first. Still, country life could never compare to the city. After years of my feeding him, Leo had grown noticeably rounder, his face fuller. What I hadn't known then, the gut-wrenching truth I learned too late, was that he had been giving a good portion of the food I saved from my own meals to Isabella. Back in the city, my parents had both been skilled technicians at the textile factory, while Isabella's family were ordinary floor workers. We'd rarely interacted before, but after being sent down to the countryside, she and Leo had grown closer. I'd assumed it was just friendship, a comfort in a strange place. I never imagined the depth of their betrayal. It's fine, Lara. Let's talk, Leo said, striding forward and grabbing my arm. He yanked me to the side so abruptly I nearly lost my balance. My vision swam with red-hot fury. I stomped hard on his foot, the heel of my shoe grinding into his instep, and pulled away. The other educated youths hurried to separate us, a chorus of "calm down" and "don't fight" filling the air. Isabella rushed to the front, placing herself protectively in front of Leo, a human shield for her beloved. "Elara Vance," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "you agreed to marry him. Now you're going back on your word. How do you think that makes Leo look?" At the outpost, Leo and I had never hidden our relationship. When he proposed, everyone had given their blessings and I had been living in a fool's paradise. I'd even begged my parents for extra supplies, fighting with them bitterly to be with him. My father, a pragmatic man, had been so disgusted he said he no longer had a daughter. And my mother, heartbroken, had been so furious she resigned early, selling her coveted position at the factory to Isabella's older brother in a fit of pique. Another piece of my life handed over to the Rossis on a silver platter. "Isabella Rossi," I said, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the tension. "What right do you have to question me? You and Leo were sneaking around behind my back. What does that make me? His fiancée?" The words landed like a bolt of thunder. A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered. Leo was the first to lash out. "Don't talk nonsense, Elara." I ignored him and grabbed Isabella's wrist, forcing her hand up for everyone to see. On her slender wrist was a delicate jade bracelet, pale green and smooth. "This bracelet," I declared, "was a gift from my mother to Leo to be given to me as an engagement token. And now you're wearing it. How do you explain that?" Isabella quickly tried to pull her hand back, a flash of pure panic in her expression before she could mask it. That reaction only made her look more guilty. A heavy silence fell over everyone, their eyes darting between the two of them, the story rewriting itself in their minds. I couldn't help but let out a cold, sharp laugh. Several village women, always eager for drama, munched on sunflower seeds and chimed in with their own commentary. "Elara, what's there to explain?" one called out. "Obviously they're together. Things like this happen in villages all the time," another added. "But when it's the educated youths, now that's something to talk about." In my last life I had also discovered the bracelet on her wrist, but Leo had brushed it off with a few glib words, saying she was just admiring it and he'd forgotten to take it back. It wasn't until I followed him back to the city, my life already in ruins, that I learned the full truth. The bracelet had originally been given by the factory director's wife to my mother as a thank you gift for solving a critical technical problem. It was valuable, but its real worth was that it could have been exchanged for a work position, a foot back in the door of the city. Isabella Rossi had used that very bracelet to get into the factory's personnel department, climbing step by step until she became the factory director's secretary, basking in the prestige and endless glory that should have been my mother's and by extension mine. The hatred I felt for her in that moment was so intense my teeth ached. Forcing the bracelet from her hand, I felt the cool jade against my palm. I decided then that even if I never used the favor it represented, I would never, ever let Isabella Rossi have it. "Elara Vance, I only let you have it before because I felt sorry for you," Leo said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Consider the bracelet repayment for the money you spent on me. Don't overthink it. Looks like I'm not very important to you after all, Leo," I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I didn't know I possessed. "In that case, there's no need for us to get married." I didn't want to waste another word on him. There was something far more important to do right now. I spotted Julian, one of the other educated youths, adjusting his glasses. His family ran a leather goods factory back in the city. He was quiet but observant. "Of all the things you could use to repay a debt," Julian asked pointedly, his voice calm but carrying, "why use an engagement gift? It seems highly inappropriate." He was right. It was a logic so simple it was irrefutable. Leo had nothing to say. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The female educated youths, who had always been somewhat envious of Isabella's popularity, now looked at her with open disdain. Even Isabella, who had always floated above reproach, was now the target of everyone's scorn, unable to lift her head. Trying to hold on to some shred of composure, Leo muttered, "Yes, I borrowed some money from Isabella. She liked the bracelet, so I gave it to her to settle the debt. I didn't know it was meant to be an engagement gift from you." I laughed even louder, the sound harsh and unforgiving. Leo's face darkened with a mixture of shame and boiling anger. "Elara Vance, stop making trouble and come home with me," he demanded, his patience clearly at an end. "What isn't yours will never be yours." "Well said," I shot back coldly, sweeping my gaze over him and Isabella. "You two should remember that line. They were the real thieves who had stolen my life, my future, my family's legacy." With more villagers gathering to watch the spectacle, I turned and headed quickly back to the outpost. I had a plan, and it didn't involve wasting any more time on these two. The outpost was buzzing when I returned. The news of my public confrontation with Leo and Isabella had spread faster than a prairie fire. Whispers stopped when I entered the common room, and curious, wary eyes followed me to my bunk. I ignored them all. Their opinions were irrelevant noise. The only thing that mattered was the list. Julian caught up with me as I was rummaging for a clean notebook. "That was quite a scene," he said, his voice low. He leaned against the bunk post, adjusting his glasses. "For what it's worth, I believe you." I paused, looking at him properly for the first time. In my previous life, Julian had been a quiet, almost invisible presence. He kept to himself, his family's wealth a subject of speculation but never confirmation. He had returned to the city early, and I'd never known what became of him. Now his calm, intelligent gaze felt like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling stiff. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, but an ally was a tool I desperately needed. "The list, Julian. Murdoch is lying. It's here." "I know it is." He nodded slowly. "My thoughts exactly. My father sent a letter. He mentioned the lists for our district were dispatched from the provincial capital over a week ago." My heart thumped hard against my ribs. This was the confirmation I needed. So Murdoch is deliberately withholding it. He's stalling, probably to give Leo time to force my hand or to finalize whatever scheme they have with Isabella. "Precisely," Julian agreed. "Confronting him again without leverage is useless. He'll just deny it. We need to see the list for ourselves." "How?" "He keeps it locked away. Probably in his house." A faint smile touched Julian's lips. "Then we need to get into his house. Not by force but by invitation. His son Owen has been trying to get on my good side for months. He thinks my family's factory can get him a city job. I've been non-committal." A plan began to form in my mind, cold and calculating. "Use that. Arrange a meeting. Tell him you're considering his proposal, but you need to discuss the local logistics with his father. Anything to get us inside that house when Murdoch is there." Julian's eyes gleamed with appreciation. "I can do that. But what will you do?" "I'll create a diversion. While you're talking logistics, I'll need to search his office. If I can just see the list, see where my name is supposed to be, I can make a copy. It's proof." It was a risky, reckless plan. If we were caught, the consequences would be severe. But the alternative, being trapped here, married to Leo, watching Isabella steal my future, was unthinkable. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next afternoon Julian found me. "It's done. Owen is over the moon. We're invited for tea at the Murdoch household this evening. He said his father will be home." My mouth went dry. This was it. Good. I'll cause a commotion outside. An argument with one of the village women who's been gossiping about me. It should be enough to draw Murdoch and his wife to the door or the window. You keep Owen occupied. I'll need 5 minutes, maybe less. As evening fell, the village settled into a quiet hum. Julian and I walked toward the brigade leader's house, a sense of grim purpose settling over us. Owen met us at the gate, his face split into a wide, eager grin. "Julian, so good of you to come. And Elara," he added, his smile faltering slightly at the sight of me. "Elara is considering a business proposition as well," Julian said smoothly. "Her family has connections in the textile industry. It seemed prudent to include her." Owen's hesitation vanished, replaced by avaricious curiosity. Of course. Please come in." The Murdoch house was the largest in the village, solid and well kept. Brigade Leader Murdoch sat in a worn armchair, looking less imposing without his desk between us. His wife, a sharp-eyed woman, served tea. The air was thick with the smell of cheap tea leaves and stale tobacco. As Julian began talking about leather goods supply chains and potential rural partnerships, I watched Murdoch. He was listening, but his eyes kept flicking to me, suspicious. I needed to act. I made a show of looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, could I have a glass of water?" I asked Mrs. Murdoch. She nodded and bustled off to the kitchen. This was my chance. I stood up. "I need some air. I'll wait on the porch." I stepped outside, my heart hammering. I could hear Julian expertly steering the conversation back to Owen's future, asking detailed questions that required the young man's full attention. I took a deep breath and then, raising my voice, I started shouting toward the house next door. "Mind your own business, you old hag. If I hear you spreading one more lie about me, I'll—" I didn't have to finish. As planned, the neighbor, a notorious gossip named Mrs. Laney, burst out of her door, her face purple with outrage. "How dare you, you little city shrew, coming here and disrespecting your elders." Our shouting match was immediate and loud. As I'd hoped, Brigade Leader Murdoch and his wife rushed to their front door, drawn by the commotion. "What is the meaning of this?" Murdoch boomed. "Alara Vance, I will not have this disruption." I was arguing back, pointing a finger at Mrs. Laney, putting on a full performance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the doorway was clear. Julian was still inside, presumably keeping Owen in his seat with talk of managerial positions and salaries. I took my chance. Slipping away from the argument for a split second, I ducked back inside the Murdoch house and into the small room he used as an office. It was a mess of papers and ledgers. My hands trembled as I frantically shuffled through the piles on his desk. Receipts for grain, work schedules, reports to the commune. And then I saw it. A typed sheet of paper with the commune's seal at the top. "Return to city authorization, Oakwood Village educated youth." My eyes scanned the list of names. There was Vance Alara. My name was on it, right below Rossi Isabella. And then my blood ran cold. I saw it. A faint pencil mark, a line drawn through my name. It was subtle, meant to be inked over later to make it permanent. Next to it, in the margin, was a scrawled note. "Vance voluntarily withdraws medical grounds. Confirmed by fiancé Grant." Rage, white-hot and pure, flooded my veins. He had done it. Leo, with Murdoch's complicity, had already begun the process of erasing me. I had to get this to the commune. I fumbled in my pocket for the small notebook and a stub of pencil I'd brought. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely write. I hastily copied the list, making sure to include the pencil mark and the note next to my name. The sound of the argument outside was dying down. I had to go. I slipped the notebook back into my pocket and crept out of the office just as Murdoch was turning back from the door, his face like thunder. Julian was standing, making a show of preparing to leave. "I apologize for the disruption, Brigade Leader," Julian said smoothly. "It seems Alara is under a great deal of stress. We should be going." Murdoch grunted, his eyes narrowing at me. I didn't care. I had what I needed. The proof was burning a hole in my pocket. Outside, as we walked away from the house, Julian looked at me. "Well." I showed him the copied list. His face hardened. "The bastard. He's already tampered with it. We have to go to the commune. Now," I said, my voice tight. "Before he makes it permanent. It's almost dark. The commune office will be closed." "Then first thing in the morning," I insisted. "We have to catch the morning cart." Julian agreed. "I'll arrange it. Meet me at the village entrance at dawn." I spent a sleepless night, the notebook under my thin pillow feeling like a live coal. Every sound from outside made me jump, expecting Leo or Murdoch to burst in and demand the evidence. The other girls in the dormitory slept soundly, oblivious to the battle raging around them. Dawn came, gray and misty. I met Julian as planned, and we managed to secure a spot on a farmer's cart heading to the commune market. The journey was bumpy and silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. My mind raced, rehearsing what I would say, how I would present my case. The commune office was a larger, slightly less dilapidated building than those in the village. Inside it smelled of ink and dust. A clerk sat behind a counter looking bored. "I need to speak to someone about the return to city list for Oakwood Village," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to steady it. The clerk didn't even look up. "Lists are final. No changes." It's not a change I want. It's a correction. My name was removed fraudulently. That got his attention. He looked up, his eyes skeptical. Fraudulently? Says who? Says me, I said, pulling out my copied list and my official educated youth identification letter. My name, Elara Vance, was on this list. I never withdrew. A man named Leo Grant impersonated my husband and lied to have it removed. The clerk took the papers, his brow furrowed. Impersonated your husband? That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. The villagers can testify that we are not married. There is no official record. He sighed as if I were a great inconvenience. Wait here. He disappeared into a back room with my papers. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Julian stood silently beside me, a steady, reassuring presence. Finally, the clerk returned, but his expression was not encouraging. He handed me the original list, the one I had seen on Murdoch's desk. But now the pencil mark through my name was gone. In its place was a firm, black ink line. It was official. My name was crossed out. I checked the registration ledger. The clerk said, his tone final. The withdrawal was processed yesterday afternoon. A Leo Hart signed for you, citing your illness and voluntary withdrawal. He had a witness from your village. It's all in order. I stared at the page, disbelief and fury warring within me. Yesterday afternoon, while I was planning my raid on Murdoch's office, Leo was already here, making it official. The witness was undoubtedly Murdoch himself or one of his lackeys. It's a lie. I cried out, my composure shattering. He is not my husband. I am not ill. I want to report Brigade Leader Murdoch for corruption and for conspiring to frame an educated youth. The clerk looked uncomfortable but unmoved. Without hard evidence, your words alone mean nothing. A signed statement from a fiancé carries weight. I'm sorry, comrade. The matter is closed. A wave of crushing helplessness washed over me. I had the truth, but it was worthless against their lies and official stamps. By the time I could gather people from the village to testify, it would be too late. The lists would be finalized and sent to the city. I felt the fight drain out of me. I had lost. They had been faster, smarter, and more connected. The familiar despair of my previous life began to creep back in. Just then a deep, calm voice sounded behind me. Comrade, who do you want to report? I turned. A group of men had entered the office. The one at the front was middle-aged, with a kind but authoritative face, dressed in a simple but well-made cadre's suit. The moment I saw him, my breath caught. It was Secretary Wei. In my previous life, when I was raising a child alone in the countryside, struggling to survive after being abandoned, he had been the only official who showed me kindness. He had given me rice and grain from his own rations more than once, allowing me to hold on. Later, malicious people accused him of improper conduct, and he was removed from his post and investigated. At the time, I had been too consumed by my own misery and the problem of scraping together funds for Leo's supposed business ventures, to pay attention to the outcome. Seeing him again now, alive and in a position of authority, filled me with a profound, aching sense of guilt and hope. Walking beside Secretary Wei was his assistant, a younger man with an intelligent face. Don't be afraid, the assistant said warmly. Our Secretary Wei is famous for working for the people. I've long heard of Secretary Wei's good name, I said, my voice choked with emotion. And yes, there is something I desperately need your help with. Opportunity, in the form of a decent and powerful man, was standing right in front of me. I would be a fool not to seize it. But this time I vowed I would not just take his help. I would ensure that his own kindness did not lead to his downfall. I would repay him fully and with all my strength. I laid out the entire story for him, showing him my copied list, the freshly inked-out name on the official list, and explaining the relationship between Leo, Isabella, and Brigade Leader Murdoch. Secretary Wei listened intently, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the clerk. Is this the ledger entry? The clerk, now pale and nervous, nodded. Why yes, Secretary Wei. Secretary Wei looked at me, his eyes filled with a resolve that made my heart soar. Comrade Vance, this is a very serious matter. Abuse of power at the local level cannot be tolerated. We will investigate this personally. He turned to his assistant. Secretary Chin, cancel my appointments for the afternoon. We are going to Oakwood Village. By the time we returned to Oakwood, night had already fallen. Secretary Wei, easygoing as ever, rode back with me on the same farmer's cart, not drawing any undue attention. As we approached the village, he suggested he and Secretary Chen hang back, allowing me to go in first and see the situation with my own eyes. Most families had finished dinner and were sitting outside their homes, enjoying the cool evening air. When they saw me, some greeted me with barely concealed amusement while others whispered to each other. I ignored them all and, with a surge of defiant courage, walked straight to the Grant family's front door and kicked it open. The scene inside was exactly as I had both expected and feared. By chance, Isabella Rossi was there having dinner with the family. The Grant couple treated her far better than they had ever treated me. Her bowl was piled high with stewed meat and vegetables, while in the past if I came over, I had to work first before being fed, or else be criticized as lazy and gluttonous. Leo, who had already lost face several times that day, set down his chopsticks the moment he saw me, his expression a mixture of anger and surprise. "You actually came back," he said, his voice low. "Elara, don't say I didn't give you a chance. You're the one making a scene and letting the whole village laugh at me." "I'm sorry, Elara," Isabella chimed in, her eyes darting nervously. "How about I give you this?" She quickly offered me her bowl of meat, a gesture so transparently pathetic it was almost funny. Mrs. Grant looked at me with pure disdain and stood up, shouting, "Elara Vance, if you don't want to be with Leo, you should have said so earlier. You just took the benefits and now you don't want to take responsibility." I ignored both women, my gaze locked on Leo. "Leo Grant, who gave you the right to go to the commune pretending to be my husband and having my name removed from the list?" His expression froze and he straightened in his seat. "What? You went to the commune? If I hadn't gone I wouldn't have known any of this," I seethed. "Where did you get the nerve? Not returning to the city means we're getting married. Why are you hitting me?" he yelled as I, seeing a sturdy stick leaning against the wall, grabbed it and swung it hard without holding back. Leo couldn't dodge in time and bolted around the cramped courtyard with me chasing after him. People outside hurried in to watch the commotion, crowding around the gate. Mr. Grant rushed forward to stop me and I accidentally struck him too. At least that's how it looked to the onlookers. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Grant, moving with a speed I didn't know she possessed, picked up a broom and began hitting Leo even harder than I had, shocking everyone. She usually doted on him the most. Mr. Grant, forgetting the blow I'd just landed on him, ran to pull his wife away. Even Isabella, seeing things get out of hand, tried to step in, only to be struck several times herself until her hands turned red. Leo had been quick to dodge at first, but when he saw Isabella get hurt, he immediately grew protective. "Dad, what are you doing? You're hurting Isabella." "It's fine, Leo," Isabella said, forcing a gentle look despite the obvious pain. In front of the Grant family, she had always maintained her perfect image and wouldn't lose her temper, even if she was clearly at her limit. Hearing Leo speak up for her, Mrs. Hart finally stopped. She braced a hand against her lower back, then turned to me with a sickeningly kindly tone. "Elara, your auntie here just taught this boy a lesson for you. Don't let your temper get the better of you." I lowered the stick without responding. Now I understood why they'd acted so out of character. It was a performance. Mr. Grant was trying to use this display of domestic discipline to pressure me into forgiving Leo. After all, if a father had already beaten his own son, then surely I shouldn't keep pressing the matter. That might have worked on the naive girl I once was, but now it only made my hatred burn hotter. "Mr. Grant," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "I can't agree with that. It was Leo who went to the commune pretending to be my husband and had my return to the city spot crossed off. Every bit of that is fact, isn't it?" "Elara, I know how much you love this boy," Mr. Grant replied, his narrow eyes fixing on me with an unmistakable hint of threat. "But don't go too far. Let this blow over. You're still going to marry him after all. In my last life I had worked hard without complaint, obeying everything, and Mr. Grant had stayed in the background like an invisible man. Now his true face was showing. The villagers exchanged looks that said they agreed with him. No one believed I truly didn't want to marry Leo. They all thought I was just making a fuss, a little tantrum that would eventually pass. I had deliberately told Secretary Wei to come in later so he could see this scene for himself. And now the moment was right. Families close to the Grants urged me not to take things so seriously, while others looked at me with open contempt. Alara, you haven't eaten yet, have you? Come in and eat. Everyone else, go home for dinner, someone called. Mrs. Grant had already figured out her husband's intent and played along, telling people to disperse. Rural folks were like this. Sometimes they'd gather for the excitement, but once it was over, they'd go on their way. If not for meeting Secretary Wei again today, I didn't even dare imagine how things might have turned out. The next moment, Secretary Wei appeared with Secretary Chin, pushing through the crowd, his expression dark. I want to see who dares bully an ordinary citizen here. Few in Oakwood Village ever went to the commune, so most didn't recognize him. People who'd been about to leave stopped in their tracks. At that moment, Brigade Leader Murdoch arrived, sweat beading his forehead as he hurried forward. Secretary Wei, why didn't you tell us you were coming so we could prepare a proper welcome? What? Give you time to cover up your wrongdoing? Secretary Wei shot back, his voice like ice. If I hadn't come in person, I wouldn't have believed it was our own officials abusing their authority. Murdoch himself, a man who commanded fear in the village, clenched his hands tightly and fixed me with a hard stare. He must have already heard about the incident on the way here. I stared right back without flinching. Seeing the brigade leader's reaction, others quickly realized this man held real authority and changed their stance toward me. Mr. Grant stepped forward with an unctuous smile. So this is Secretary Wei from the commune. We've long heard you're the righteous official of our time. Meeting you today proves it's true. Secretary Chin stepped in. Comrade, there's no need for flattery. Secretary Wei won't show favoritism for such words. He held his chin high and pulled out a pen and paper, starting to take notes. Watching from the side, I silently thanked my luck again for bringing these two here. Leo and Isabella both froze at the sight of him. They sometimes visited the county town and had of course heard of Secretary Wei's tough style, especially his strictness in cases of improper relationships between men and women. I shot Leo a provocative look, daring him to try and stir up trouble now. So what if he had connections in Oakwood Village? I could bring in my own people too. Seeing the moment was right, I stepped forward and laid out the entire story for everyone to hear, waving the large sheet with the return to the city list that Secretary Wei had brought from the commune office. The more Secretary Wei listened, the darker his expression grew. No one around dared to breathe too loudly. The other educated youths had arrived and stood in the crowd, watching me from a distance. Since we'd been sent down, I was the first to openly challenge the brigade leader and win the ear of a high-ranking official. Julian Owen looked at me with open admiration. Owen Murdoch, Secretary Wu demanded, his voice echoing in the silent courtyard. You tell me exactly what's going on here. The brigade leader stammered, his eyes darting all over the place. For a long time he couldn't get a single word out. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. I swept my gaze over their nervous faces and felt a sharp, vindictive sense of satisfaction. The silence in the Grant's courtyard was thick enough to choke on. All eyes were fixed on Brigade Leader Murdoch, whose face had gone the color of stale dough. He stood before Secretary Wei, a man who had once been his peer but now felt like his judge. I was only following procedure, Secretary Wei, Murdoch finally stammered, his voice a weak imitation of its usual bluster. The young people, their relationships. It's complicated. Leo Grant came to me as her fiancé. He said she was ill, emotionally distressed, that she wanted to withdraw but was too proud to do it herself. He had a witness. And who was this witness? Secretary Wei's voice was deceptively calm. Murdoch's eyes darted toward Isabella, who flinched and tried to shrink into the background. It was Comrade Rossi. She confirmed that Alara was unwell and had agreed to let Leo handle the matter. A fresh wave of fury washed over me. So that was their play. Use my supposed friendship with Isabella and my relationship with Leo to create a web of lies so plausible that no one would question it. Without Secretary Wei it would have worked perfectly. Is that so? Secretary Wei turned his gaze to Isabella. Comrade Rossi, you attest that Alara Vance was of unsound mind and wished to give up her place to you? Isabella looked like a rabbit caught in a snare. Her delicate facade crumbled under the weight of his direct question. I only said she seemed stressed, she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo told me she had agreed. I believed him. That's not what you told me. Murdoch snapped, his own survival instinct overriding any loyalty to the Grants. You said she was hysterical, that she couldn't handle the pressure of returning. The crowd erupted in murmurs. The story was unraveling and the rats were turning on each other. Secretary Wei held up a hand for silence. He then turned his formidable attention to Leo. Leo Grant, why did you impersonate Alara Vance's husband to have her name removed from the return to the city list? Years in leadership had given Secretary Wei an aura of authority so strong it was almost suffocating. Leo immediately shrank back, his bravado evaporating. His voice was barely louder than a mosquito's hum when he answered. Alara and I are about to get married. As her husband, shouldn't I have the right to do what's best for her? The moment he said it, a few of his family's staunchest supporters in the crowd chimed in with agreement. Others started dredging up old, curated stories of our past affection, using them as proof of our bond. I couldn't hold back anymore. The sheer audacity of his lie, the grotesque distortion of the truth, broke the last of my restraint. I strode forward and kicked him hard in the shin, sending him stumbling into Isabella. Nonsense! I shouted, my voice ringing with a clarity that silenced everyone. I've already told you I'm not marrying you. Are you deaf? Alara, I know you look down on me because I'm a country boy, Leo said through clenched teeth, trying to paint himself as the victim. But you agreed before. You can't go back on your word now that going home is an option. He refused to admit any fault, clinging to his claim like a dog with a bone. I took a deep breath, forcing my rage into a cold, sharp instrument. Secretary Wei, I said, turning to him, my voice steady now. He refuses to acknowledge the truth. But the truth is that he and Isabella Rossi have been involved with each other for a long time. I pointed an accusing finger at the two of them standing so close together. Why would I still marry him? I'm not going to keep playing the fool for them. The rumor, which had been buzzing through the village like a persistent fly, now solidified into accepted fact. I had said it aloud, in front of everyone, in front of Secretary Wei. Leo's parents rushed to defend him. Don't talk nonsense. Mrs. Grant shrieked. They're just close friends. Childhood friends. But their protests were weak, drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. The older village women who had seen the bracelet incident eagerly chimed in, their voices rising in agreement. Even Mrs. Grant's sharp tongue couldn't turn things around now. I decided to drive the final nail in the coffin. It's not just the list. It's the theft. The jade bracelet my mother gave as an engagement token was found on Isabella's wrist. Leo claims it was repayment for a debt. What kind of man repays a debt to one woman with an engagement gift meant for another? I looked directly at Secretary Wei. That bracelet was from the director of the textile factory. It was meant to secure a position for me. My mother sold her job to Isabella's brother in a fit of anger after I fought with my parents over Leo. Now Isabella has the bracelet and my spot on the list was nearly stolen. They are systematically taking everything from me. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place for everyone watching. This wasn't just a lover's quarrel. It was a calculated campaign of theft and fraud. Secretary Wei's face was a mask of stern judgment. He had heard enough. Owen Murdoch, for dereliction of duty, abuse of power, and conspiring to defraud an educated youth of her legal rights. You are suspended from your position as brigade leader, effective immediately. You will remain in the village pending a full investigation. Murdoch looked as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. His power, which had seemed so absolute just hours before, had evaporated. Secretary Wei then turned to Leo and Isabella. Leo Grant for forgery, impersonation, and misrepresentation, and Isabella Rossi for bearing false witness and involvement in this scheme. You will both come with me to the commune for further questioning. Deliberately erasing someone's name from the roster is a serious offense. The color drained from both their faces. Isabella began to cry, genuine tears of terror this time. I haven't done anything wrong. Why should I have to go? Because you are suspected of being part of a conspiracy to undermine state policy regarding educated youth, Secretary Chen stated, his voice calm but unyielding. Your cooperation is required. At this crucial time when everyone's fate hung in the balance, Isabella had fought harder than anyone for her chance to return to the city. To see it slipping away because of her own greed unleashed something feral in her. Alara Vance, this is all your fault, she screamed, her beautiful face contorted with hatred. No wonder Leo doesn't like you. No one would want a vicious, heartless creature like you. Perfect, I replied, my voice cold. I don't want the affection of a useless man anyway. The insult to Leo was the final straw for her. As Secretary Chen moved to escort her, she suddenly lunged, seizing a kitchen knife that had been left on a nearby stool after the evening meal. Her eyes were blazing red with pure, unadulterated rage. If I can't go back, then neither can you, she shrieked. I froze on the spot, gripped by a surge of pure, paralyzing fear. This wasn't a scheme or a lie. This was raw, desperate violence. She had completely lost control, ready to drag me down with her into utter ruin. Leo also realized the gravity of the situation. Attempted murder meant prison time, while a trip to the commune would have only brought criticism and re-education. He rushed forward to block her. Isabella, you can't do this. You'll ruin the rest of your life. Get out of my way. My life was ruined a long time ago, she shouted, ignoring him entirely as she lunged toward me. In the chaotic struggle, Leo tried to wrest the knife from her, but her momentum was too great. The blade drove straight through the palm of his hand. A raw, gut-wrenching scream tore from his throat, and blood sprayed onto the hard-packed earth of the courtyard. The scene descended into absolute chaos. I stood shocked into stillness. Mrs. Grant reacted quickly, shoving Isabella hard away from her son and breaking into loud, theatrical sobs. Oh, my poor boy. Look what these two vicious women have done to you. Secretary Wei, you have to help us get justice. Mr. Grant, who had been standing by the door, his face as pale as paper, slid down to the ground in a dead faint. The sight of his only son, his hope for the future, bleeding profusely, was too much for him. Secretary Wei, his expression grim, had seen enough. Enough, his voice boomed, cutting through the hysteria. He ordered the now former brigade leader and some of the villagers to separate everyone. Leo was hurriedly attended to, a strip of cloth wrapped tightly around his bleeding hand. Isabella, now sobbing uncontrollably, was restrained. As one of the people involved, you will need to come to the commune to give a formal statement, Secretary Wei said to me, his voice softer now. I just nodded, my body trembling from the adrenaline crash. On the journey to the commune, Isabella, in a separate cart, continued to scream and curse my name, until Secretary Chen was forced to gag her to prevent her from causing further harm or inciting herself further. The commune took the matter with the utmost seriousness. The attempted assault with a weapon coupled with the fraud made it a major case. I gave my statement clearly and calmly, detailing everything from the beginning. Julian and several other educated youths were brought in to corroborate my story about my relationship with Leo and the public confrontations. By the next day, the punishments were decided and announced in a public meeting. Both Leo Grant and Isabella Rossi were subjected to public denunciation. Their crimes were read aloud for the entire commune to hear. Leo Grant was fined a crippling 100 yuan, a fortune for a rural family, and sentenced to 10 days of detention for forgery and impersonation. Isabella Rossi for her malicious conduct bearing false witness, and most seriously for the attempted assault with a deadly weapon, was fined 300 yuan and sentenced to 15 days of detention and mandatory re-education. Most importantly, Secretary Wei himself announced that my name was officially restored to the return to the city list. The entry with Leo's forged signature was struck from the ledger with a bold red line. My place was secure. A temporary replacement, a young, idealistic cadre from the commune, was assigned to manage Oakwood Village pending a permanent solution. The power structure that had oppressed me for so long had been shattered in a single night. In the days that followed, a strange peace settled over Oakwood Village. The former brigade leader kept his head down, a broken man. The Grant family was consumed with trying to care for Leo's injured hand and scrambling to find the money for his fine, leaving me blessedly alone. The atmosphere toward the educated youths shifted palpably. We were no longer seen as disposable labor, but as people with connections and a voice. Villagers who had once ignored or scorned us now offered small kindnesses, inviting us for meals in a transparent attempt to build connections that might benefit them later in the city. Even though most of us weren't eager to socialize, we couldn't afford to be outright rude. When I received a formal written invitation to a dinner at the former brigade leader Murdoch's house, I was deeply suspicious. By all logic, he should have hated me more than anyone. Julian was also invited and we agreed to go together for safety. The Grant couple was busy running around trying to find connections to get their son out of detention early, so they were no longer a threat for the moment. The banquet was filled with familiar villagers, which eased my guard slightly. The Murdochs, especially Owen and his wife, were excessively polite, toasting me repeatedly and offering vague, rambling apologies. They held me back to talk for a long time after the meal, mostly about how I should look out for them after I returned to the city, how their son Owen had so much potential. Outwardly, I stayed neutral, offering non-committal responses. But inwardly I scoffed. These were the same people who had watched and sometimes participated in my misery. Their sudden deference was born of fear, not respect. Most of the educated youths plied with cheap liquor, ended up drunk, and the villagers took responsibility for sending them home. I had been careful, drinking only tea. I waited, half expecting some last-minute trick, but as the evening wore on, nothing happened. Perhaps the Murdochs were truly chastened. Then as I prepared to leave, I began to feel dizzy. A strange, heavy warmth spread through my limbs. It wasn't the fatigue of a long day. It was a chemical haze, a familiar, terrifying sensation from the drugged wine in my previous life. My suspicions had been right. This had been a trap all along. I instinctively headed for the door, my vision starting to blur. At some point, Owen Murdoch had appeared behind me. "Leaving so soon, Alara? My wife will see you home." Before I could refuse, his daughter-in-law, a stout woman with a strong grip, latched onto my arm, pulling me outside. "It's no trouble," she said, her voice syrupy. My head grew heavier with every step. I had to gulp for air. I realized with a jolt of panic that this wasn't the path back to the outpost. "Where is this?" I slurred, trying to wrench my arm free. "I'm going back to the outpost." The woman didn't answer. She just tightened her grip and pulled me faster, turning down a narrow, dark alley between two houses. Then, with a surprising burst of strength, she shoved me forward and turned and ran, her footsteps fading into the night. I stumbled, catching myself against a rough mud brick wall. The world tilted around me. "Alara Vance, long time no see." That mocking, hate-filled voice made my skin crawl. I turned, my movements sluggish, and found Leo Grant staring at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph in the dim light. Next to him stood Isabella Rossi, her face a mask of bitter, simmering hatred. Leo's hand was wrapped in a dirty bandage, spotted with blood. "Shouldn't be out of detention," I managed to say, the words thick on my tongue. The word detention seemed to hit a raw nerve. Leo's smirk vanished, replaced by fury. My mother pulled some strings. "A temporary release for family emergency," he sneered. "Just long enough to deal with you." He exploded into motion, grabbing me and slamming me toward the ground. Isabella moved fast, yanking my other arm. Together they held me so tightly I could barely move, their combined strength overwhelming my drugged state. "Alara Vance, did you really think a little public humiliation meant you'd won?" Isabella hissed in my ear, her breath hot. She started talking, the words spilling out in a venomous stream. She talked about the time before we were sent down. She said that from the first day her family moved into the textile factory's housing compound, she couldn't stand to see me living well. My parents were respected technicians, hers were lowly workers. I had only wanted to help her fit in, but she thought I was showing off on purpose, flaunting my family's status, and she had held a grudge ever since. "After we were sent to the countryside, I competed with you in everything," she spat. "Whatever you had, I wanted to take. Your rations, your parents' gifts, and finally your man." Hearing this, the sheer pettiness and depth of her hatred, I was stunned. So, in my past life she'd ruined me completely, stolen my future, my family, everything, all because of childish jealousy. The realization made a sick laugh bubble in my throat. So much for trying to help people. I'd only raised my own enemy. "You've already been drugged," she said coldly. "Once you're caught in the act with some village lout, your precious spot on the list will be gone for sure. Secretary Wei won't be able to save you then." "You forced me into this," Leo added in a low, sinister voice. "Let's go." Together they began dragging me, half carrying, half dragging my weakening body toward the most remote part of the village, where the old, abandoned storage shack stood near the river. The plan was clear. Disgrace me so thoroughly that my return to the city would be impossible. Despair, colder than the river water, sank into my bones. I should have known. I should never have come to that dinner. I had underestimated their desperation and their connections. I hadn't thought that people in detention could slip out so easily. That was my fatal mistake. Ilara, you'd better remember this night, Isabella said smugly. The face that usually pretended to be gentle and friendly now looked like a demon's in the moonlight. I kicked out at them, but my limbs were heavy, my strength sapped by the drug. It was useless. They shoved me closer to the dilapidated shack, its door hanging open like a dark, hungry mouth. Just as I was about to be pushed inside, I heard the sound of many footsteps behind us, and the flicker of torchlight cut through the darkness. I thought I saw Owen Murdoch in that direction, and I recognized other familiar voices too. Hope, sharp and desperate, flared in my chest. Beside us was the shallow river that bordered the village. It wasn't deep, but I couldn't swim. The shock of the cold water might be my only chance. Leo and Isabella, both amateurs at this kind of villainy, panicked when they saw the approaching lights and people. They froze for a critical second, their grip loosening. I seized the moment. With the last of my conscious will, I gathered my strength, and in one frantic twisting motion, I broke free and threw myself sideways, straight into the black rushing water. The cold was a physical blow, shocking the haze from my mind for a precious instant. The water wasn't deep, but the current was strong, pulling at my clothes. I gasped, swallowing water, flailing wildly. In the still night, the splash was deafening. Hey! Someone fell in the water. Isn't that Leo Grant and Isabella Rossi? Weren't they supposed to be in detention? A voice shouted curiously from the bank. Through the water in my eyes, I saw a figure plunge into the river without hesitation. Strong arms grabbed me, pulling me back toward the safety of the shore. It was Julian, his clothes soaked, his face a mask of grim determination. A group of people holding torches arrived, lighting up the riverbank. More and more villagers came to see what was happening. Even though Leo and Isabella split up and ran, they couldn't escape the villagers who now saw them not as local favorites, but as criminals caught in the act. As I lay on the bank, coughing up water wrapped in someone's dry coat, shivering uncontrollably, I saw them being dragged back, their faces pale with terror. Julian stood over me, a protective presence. The evidence was ironclad. Their families would try to take the blame, to spin some story, but it was too late. I had survived their worst, and this time they wouldn't escape. Lying on the riverbank, shivering uncontrollably under a coarse wool blanket, I felt a strange clarity pierce through the drug-induced haze and the shock of the cold water. The torches held by the villagers cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the faces of Leo and Isabella as they were dragged back, struggling and pleading. The scene was a grotesque tableau of their utter defeat. Julian knelt beside me, his own clothes soaked. "Ilara, can you speak?" I nodded, my teeth chattering. "Drugged," I managed to gasp. "At the Murdochs, the wine." His face hardened. He looked toward Owen Murdoch, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, looking as pale and guilty as a man facing his own execution. The villagers' murmurs were no longer of idle gossip, but of outright condemnation. The educated youths who had come with the rescue party, Liam, Ben, Maya, looked on with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. The story was undeniable now. A coordinated plot involving the former brigade leader's family to drug, assault, and disgrace me. "They tried to kill me," I said, my voice gaining strength as the cold cleared my head. The accusation rang out, stark and terrible in the night air. Leo, held tightly by two burly farmers, snapped back. "That's not true. I just wanted to ruin your reputation, teach you a lesson." His confession, blurted out in a panic, was more damning than any testimony I could give. I curved my lips in a cold, triumphant smile, my gaze sweeping toward Mrs. Grant, the true mastermind. She stood rigid, her face a stony mask showing no emotion. She suddenly slapped Mr. Hart hard across the face. "If you can't say something useful, then shut up," she shrieked, a desperate attempt to control the narrative and take charge of the chaos. "I've had enough of you." For once, Mr. Grant didn't immediately cower. "This is our only son," he argued back, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and long-suppressed frustration. "If you're not going to help, fine, but don't you dare hit me." Their public bickering was a pitiful spectacle, underscoring the disintegration of the family that had once seemed so untouchable. In the chaos, their words barely mattered. The truth was plain for all to see. Julian had already gone to fetch the temporary brigade leader and, more importantly, to send word to the commune. Someone handed me a tin cup of hot water. As I sipped it, the warmth spreading through my frozen hands, I couldn't help the small, grim smile that tugged at my lips. This was the end for them. The temporary leader, a young man named Comrade Liang, arrived swiftly, his face serious. He took one look at the scene, me drenched and shivering, Julian soaked from his rescue, Leo and Isabella in restraints, and his expression turned to granite. The evidence was ironclad. There wasn't even room for excuses. Leo and the former brigade leader Owen Murdoch exchanged a single hopeless glance. They understood the game was over. At a time like this, silence was their only feeble defense. The more they said, the deeper the hole they would dig. But I had no intention of letting them retreat into silence. I needed a full confession, a public unraveling of their entire scheme. Isabella, with her fragile ego and towering self-pity, was the perfect point of weakness. Comrade Liang began his questioning, but both Leo and Isabella clammed up, refusing to name anyone else. I slowly got to my feet, the blanket wrapped tightly around my shoulders. I walked over to where Isabella was being held and crouched down so our eyes were level. "Be honest, Isabella," I said, my voice low but carrying in the hushed night. "Which one of you was the mastermind?" She glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, stubborn line. Neither of them spoke. I didn't get angry. I leaned closer. "The mastermind and an accomplice aren't punished the same," I whispered, the words for her alone. "I remember you still plan on going back to the city to take over that factory position, don't you? The one your brother got from my mother." That one reminder hit her where it hurt the most. Her family favored sons over daughters. That job was her only ticket to independence and respectability. Compared to Leo, who could always fall back on his family's land, Isabella was even less able to endure a long prison sentence. She'd only come along with him to watch me suffer, to savor her victory, but procuring the drug and planning the entire incident wasn't something she could have pulled off on her own. She was a follower, not a leader. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the frantic weighing of loyalties against her own survival. I was confident she wouldn't disappoint me. Sure enough, just as Comrade Liang was about to press Owen Murdoch, Isabella broke. "It was her," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Mrs. Grant. "She got the drug. She arranged for the temporary release. She told us to do it. She said it was the only way to make sure Alara stayed and that Leo wouldn't be shamed." Leo exploded. "You lying snake. You were the one who said we should ruin her. You said she deserved it. Only because you couldn't control her." Isabella shrieked back. "You useless mama's boy. You couldn't even get a city girl to marry you without stealing her spot." The dam had broken. They traded vicious, revealing insults, laying bare their shared resentment, their pathetic ambitions and their mutual contempt. For two people who had always acted so deeply affectionate, the scene was surreal, a brutal exposure of the rotten core of their relationship. When their own benefits were at stake, their hearts turned instantly, predictably cruel. With so many eyes on them, Owen Murdoch had no way to keep shielding anyone. He buckled under Comrade Liang's questioning, admitting he'd known of the plan and had provided the venue, hoping to curry favor with the Grants and secure his family's future once the unpleasantness with me was over. The next day, Secretary Wei returned to Oakwood Village. He found the matter already resolved, the confessions recorded and signed. His face was grim as he listened to Comrade Liang's report. He came to me where I was resting at the outpost. "Comrade Vance, I owe you an apology. I had hoped the initial punishments would serve as a sufficient warning. I underestimated their ruthlessness." "It is not you who should apologize, Secretary Wei," I said sincerely. "You gave me a chance and because of you I was able to fight back. I cannot thank you enough." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I promise you they will not be allowed to slip away so easily again. The law has long arms." The final judgments were swift and severe. Owen Murdoch was permanently stripped of his position and barred from any future village leadership role. His actions were deemed a gross violation of organizational discipline and public trust. Leo Grant, for his role in the fraud and for the attempted assault and kidnapping, had his detention sentence extended to 6 months of hard labor at a correctional farm. His fine was doubled. Isabella Rossi, for bearing false witness, involvement in the conspiracy and attempted assault with a weapon, saw her own sentence increased to 1 year in a women's re-education camp. Her dream of returning to the city to take over the factory job was extinguished, likely forever. Mrs. Grant, as the admitted mastermind, faced the harshest punishment. As the primary instigator of a plot involving drugging and intent to cause grievous social harm, she was sentenced to 2 years in a provincial prison. The Grant family was left reeling, their reputation in tatters, their finances crippled by fines, and their matriarch gone. A new permanent brigade leader was appointed from outside the village, a stern but fair man who immediately set about restoring order and impartiality. In the days that followed, a profound silence seemed to fall over the parts of the village that had been enmeshed in the conspiracy. The Grants' house looked shuttered and empty. The Murdochs kept to themselves. A sense of justice, long dormant, had been served, and the air itself felt cleaner, lighter. My departure date was now just a week away. I spent my time quietly packing my meager belongings, saying polite but distant goodbyes to the villagers who had shown me kindness only at the end. Julian was also preparing to leave, his family's connections having secured his place on the list some time ago. The day before I was to leave, he found me mending a tear in my only good shirt. "I have a proposition for you," he said, adjusting his glasses in that familiar way of his. I looked up, curious. "My family's leather goods factory, it's not far from the textile factory where your parents worked. We are always in need of people with a good eye for detail and a strong will." He paused, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "What I mean to say is, when you are settled, if you are looking for work, I could put in a good word." It was an offer of friendship and perhaps something more, built on a foundation of shared struggle and mutual respect. It was so different from the possessive transactional love Leo had offered. "Thank you, Julian," I said, and I meant it. "I will consider it. Truly." The morning of my departure dawned clear and bright. A single truck was to take the returning educated youths from Oakwood to the train station. As I climbed into the back, my small bag clutched in my hand, I took one last look at the place that had brought me so much pain, and in the end such a hard-won victory. I saw a figure standing at a distance near the edge of the village. It was Isabella, being escorted by a stern-faced female cadre, presumably on her way to the camp. Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like that, only a quiet, profound relief that I would never have to see her again. As the truck rumbled to life and pulled away, I turned my face forward toward the road, toward the train, toward the city. I was leaving the turmoil of the past behind, stepping into a completely different chapter of my life. The train journey was a blur of noise and motion. I stared out the window at the passing countryside, the cramped villages giving way to wider fields, then to the outskirts of the city. The air began to change, smelling of coal smoke and industry instead of damp earth and manure. When the train finally pulled into the station, the platform was a cacophony of reunions. And then I saw them. My parents. They looked older, their faces lined with worry, and I saw with a pang hope. My mother's hands were clasped tightly together, my father stood straight, his expression unreadable. I stepped off the train and walked toward them. For a long moment no one spoke. Then my mother's composure broke and she pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace. "Elara," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "My girl. You're home." My father placed a hesitant hand on my shoulder. "Welcome home, daughter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The rift between us, once so wide, felt bridgeable in that moment. They took me back to our old apartment in the factory housing compound. It was smaller than I remembered, but it was clean and bright. A simple but carefully prepared dinner was waiting on the table. Away from the scheming and the constant fear of Oakwood Village, the air even tasted fresher. A few days after my return, I received a letter. It was from Secretary Chin. He wrote that Secretary Wei, having resolved the Oakwood Village dispute so perfectly and rooting out a nest of corruption, had received unanimous praise from his superiors. He had been promoted to a position in the provincial office. I was happy for him. I sat down at the small desk in my room and wrote him a long, heartfelt letter of thanks, wishing him well in his new post and assuring him that his faith in justice had not been misplaced. At the textile factory, I formally took over my mother's old position. The work was meticulous and sometimes tedious, checking thread counts and fabric quality, but it was indoors, it was safe, and it was mine. It was a new journey. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, began to fade, not forgotten but finally losing its power to hurt me. It drifted away like clouds scattering after a storm, leaving behind a clear, open sky and the steady, promising rhythm of a new life, built not on dreams or dependence, but on my own two hands and the unwavering strength I had found within myself. The city was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The constant, distant hum of machinery from the textile mill, the clatter of trams on their rails, the sharp calls of street vendors. It was a world away from the deep silences and natural chorus of Oakwood Village. For the first few weeks, I felt like a ghost in my own life, moving through the cramped apartment and the bustling streets with a sense of dislocation. My body was here, but my spirit was still catching up, untangling itself from the vines of the past. My parents treated me with a careful, almost fragile politeness. The bitter words we had exchanged before my departure, my father's declaration that he no longer had a daughter, my mother's furious resignation, hung in the air between us, an unspoken chasm. We were all trying to find our way back to each other, navigating a landscape scarred by my choices. It was my mother who made the first real overture. One evening, as I was helping her wash the dishes, she said, her voice deliberately casual, "The factory manager's wife, Mrs. Fong, asked after you. She was sorry to hear about your difficulties in the countryside." I stiffened, my hands pausing in the soapy water. "What did you tell her?" "I told her my daughter was home and that she was strong," my mother said, her gaze fixed on the plate she was scrubbing. "I told her you had faced down wolves and won." Tears pricked unexpectedly at my eyes. It was the closest she had come to acknowledging my ordeal and to offering her pride. It wasn't an apology, nor did it need to be. It was a bridge. My father's reconciliation was quieter, more practical. He began leaving technical manuals from the factory on my bedside table. "The machinery has been updated since you left," he'd say gruffly. "You'll need to understand the new tolerances." It was his language of care. The work at the textile factory was a different kind of challenge. My mother's old position was in quality control, a role that required a sharp eye and an unwavering attention to detail. I stood for hours at a long table under harsh fluorescent lights, running my fingers over bolts of fabric, searching for flaws in the weave, inconsistencies in the dye. The other women in the department were mostly older, their hands swift and sure. They viewed me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The daughter who had thrown everything away for a country boy, now returned, scarred and seemingly wiser. I kept my head down, focused on the work. The repetitive, tactile nature of it was a kind of therapy. Each perfect bolt I approved, each flawed one I rejected, felt like a small act of restoring order to my own world. A letter arrived from Julian. His family's leather goods factory, Prosperity Goods, was located on the other side of the industrial district. His handwriting was neat and precise. "Dear Alara, I hope this letter finds you well and settling into city life. It is a different rhythm, is it not? Louder and in some ways more lonely. My father has me learning the business from the bottom up, which currently means I spend my days inventorying hides and annoying the foreman with questions. I remember our conversation before you left. The offer to put in a word for you at Prosperity Goods stands. We have a design department that is always looking for fresh perspectives. The work is more creative than checking thread counts. Just a thought. I also have news from Oakwood. The new brigade leader has implemented a rotating work schedule that is apparently much fairer. The Grant family is keeping a very low profile. Some things, it seems, do change. I hope to hear from you when you have a moment. Yours, Julian." I read the letter 3 times, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the factory's heating. His tone was easy, friendly, but the invitation was clear. A design department. The idea was tantalizing. But was I ready to leave the fragile piece I was building at the textile mill? To step into another world where I would be, once again, the newcomer relying on a connection? For now, I decided to stay put. I wrote back to Julian, thanking him for the offer and the news and describing in vague terms my adjustment to city life and my work. Kept the tone light, friendly. A seed had been planted, but I was in no rush to see it grow. Life settled into a new, quiet routine. Work, home, the market on Sundays with my mother. The sheer normalcy of it was a balm. I started noticing the city's small beauties. The way the morning sun caught the laundry strung between apartment blocks, the intricate patterns of rust on a discarded gear, the determined green of a weed pushing through a crack in the pavement. One Saturday, my mother insisted on taking me to get new clothes. "You can't wear those patched-up countryside things forever," she said, her old, decisive self re-emerging. As we browsed through a state-run department store, I felt a hand on my arm. "Alara Vance? Is that you?" I turned to face a woman about my age, her hair styled in a fashionable wave, wearing a well-cut wool coat. It took me a moment to place her. Lynette, a girl I'd known vaguely in school. Her family had been neighbors to the Rossies. "Lynette," I said, forcing a smile. "Hello. I heard you were back," she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, taking in my simple worn clothes. "And I heard about, well, everything. With Isabella." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What a mess. My mother always said that girl had a jealous streak a mile wide. To think she'd go that far." She shook her head, but her eyes were bright with avid curiosity. "Is it true she tried to, you know?" She made a stabbing motion with her hand. The casual cruelty of the gossip, the reduction of my trauma into a salacious tidbit, made my stomach clench. This was the other side of city life. The constant judging eyes, the networks of information and rumor that were just as potent as those in the village. "It's all in the past," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'd rather not talk about it." Lynette's smile tightened. Of course. Well, it's good to see you looking so, well." She gave me a final dismissive once-over and moved on. My mother, who had been observing the exchange, linked her arm through mine. "Vipers," she muttered under her breath. "Come on. Let's find you a coat that doesn't have patches." The encounter left me unsettled. The past wasn't as buried as I'd hoped. Isabella's family was here in this city. The shame I had brought upon their daughter would not be forgotten. I had to be careful. A few days later, the foreman in my department, a man named Lao Zhang, called me over. "Vance, the manager wants to see you in his office." A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Had I made a mistake? Had Isabella's family already begun to make trouble? Manager Feng's office was a small, glass-walled room overlooking the factory floor. He was a stout man with a kind, tired face. He gestured for me to sit. "Comrade Vance," he began, steepling his fingers. "Your work has been satisfactory. Meticulous." "Thank you, sir." "Your mother was one of our best technicians," he continued. "A sharp mind. She tells me you have inherited her eye for detail." He paused. "We have a problem. A shipment of premium brocade, bound for export. The client is rejecting it, claiming the color is inconsistent. My people here say it's within tolerance. I need a fresh pair of eyes. An unbiased opinion. Your file says you were dealing with natural dyes in the countryside." I nodded, my heart beginning to pound. "Sir. We used berries, roots, walnut husks." "Good. I want you to go through the entire shipment. Bolt by bolt. Under different lights. I want a full report. This is a sensitive matter. Can you handle it?" This was more than just checking for flaws. This was trust. This was responsibility. It was a chance to prove I was more than the girl who had made a disastrous mistake. "I can handle it, sir," I said, my voice steady. For the next 3 days I lived and breathed brocade. I worked in a separate, quiet room, spreading the heavy, ornate fabric under north-facing light, then under the harsh factory lights, then in the dimmer light of late afternoon. I compared each bolt to the approved sample, noting the subtlest shifts in the crimson dye, from a true ruby to a slightly orange-tinged scarlet. I documented everything in a precise, clear report, complete with sketches of the most problematic sections. On the 4th day, I handed my report to Manager Feng. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "You're sure?" "Sir." "The dye vats were not properly maintained. The temperature fluctuated. It caused the inconsistency. It's most noticeable in batches 3 and 5. He let out a long breath. "That's what I suspected. But my head dyer is a proud man. He needed proof from someone he couldn't accuse of having an old grudge." He gave me a small, genuine smile. "Well done, Comrade Vance. You've just saved this factory a significant financial loss and a great deal of face. Your mother was right about you." The praise was a physical warmth. It was the first thing of tangible value I had created in this new life, built on my own skill and judgment, not on anyone's charity or connection. That evening I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I decided to write to Julian again. This time my letter was longer. I told him about the brocade, about Manager Feng's trust, about the small victory. I didn't just report the facts. I shared the feeling. It felt like a risk to be so open, but a necessary one. His reply came faster than the last. Dear Alara, your story about the brocade made me smile. It seems you have a knack for uncovering the truth, whether it's in a fabric pattern or a human one. I have no doubt you were brilliant. My own days remain filled with the smell of tanning solutions and the thrilling task of reconciling supply ledgers. Your world of color and texture sounds far more appealing. Your success has also inspired me to be bold. I spoke to my father about the design department. He was skeptical, but I persisted. I showed him some of the patterns I've been sketching in my spare time, geometric designs inspired by some of the rural wood carvings I saw but modernized. He grunted, which from him is high praise. He has agreed to let me reorganize a small, neglected corner of the workshop and try to develop a new line. It's a start. Perhaps when you have time you might like to see it. An expert opinion from the savior of the brocade shipment would be invaluable. Here's Julian. I held the letter, the paper crisp in my hands. He was building something and he was asking me to be a part of it. Not out of pity but out of respect. The seed that had been planted was now pushing through the soil, reaching for the sun. I looked around my small room at the city lights beginning to twinkle outside my window. The past was a shadow, but it no longer dictated my steps. I had a job where I was valued. I had a fragile but growing peace with my parents. And I had a friend, perhaps more than a friend, who saw a future I could help shape. The texture of my new life was no longer just about survival. It was becoming about possibility. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt not like a refugee from a terrible fate, but like an architect of my own destiny. The journey was far from over, but I was finally, truly moving forward. The end.